part of your morning with us today. We are really excited to be able to launch our outpatient nursing track program and excited that you're here to share this moment with all of us. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of the people who made this possible. There are a number of people involved in our planning committee. We had a focus group of experts, some that are in this room today, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those individuals. And if you're in the room, quick wave or stand up, that would be great. Jim Alexander, thank you. Monica, who's part of our panel today as well, thank you for joining us. Sally, one of our board members, is also out there. Linda Helcom. Tiffany Hollier, I don't think Tiffany is here today. Marie Manthe is out of the country, but has played an incredible role in being able to bring this together. Yolanda Matson.
It's Lamar now, though.
Yolanda Lamar. Let's make sure that we get that right. Shereen McConnell. Carrie Matrude, am I saying that right? Is you here this morning? Okay. Diane Nass, unfortunately, as many of you know, passed away recently, and so would just like to take a moment to show a sign of respect for Diane. So if you would join me in a moment of silence for Diane. Thank you. And Kelly, I saw Kelly. You moved. Thank you for all of your work and all of the time and energy that you put in to make this all possible. So if you did not know this, 2020 has been proclaimed the year of the nurse. How many nurses are in the room? If you're a nurse, please stand up. We know that nurses play such an important role in our communities throughout the lifespan, from birth until the very end. We see nurses in our schools, we see them in our emergency rooms, delivering our babies. There are so many ways that nurses impact our life across the entire lifespan. And because of the critical work that they do, it's important that we recognize our nurses and that we support our nurses in order to be healthy, in order to be supported, so that they can create healing environments for their patients. Because if our nurses are not doing well, our patients are not going to be doing well at all. So we need to ensure that we're supporting nurses in order to be able to be the best that they are able to be. So to all the nurses in the room today, thank you for your commitment. Thank you for all that you do to build stronger communities for all of us. Now there's one nurse in the room today who has not only played an important part in bringing this program together, but she has courageously stepped up to share in a very important part of her journey and her story. And we know that there's power in storytelling. We know that there's power in being able to share our stories and our experiences. And so I just wanted to take a brief moment to play a really powerful video related to one of our very own nurses at Wayside, Carol Bell.
Having technical difficulties with the sound, I apologize.
My name is Carol. I'm 68 years old and I live in Maple Grove, Minnesota. I am a mother of 4 amazing daughters. I'm a registered nurse and I work in a residential treatment center for women who struggle with mental health and chemical dependency issues. a survivor myself. I am sober. I am on the good road, and I have been for 12 years, and I'm blessed. I was sentenced to Shakopee for felony DWI, and it was pretty horrifying. I had been in some serious car accidents and had gotten addicted to opioids. I ended up going to Hazleton, and I got off of the opioids, but then I started drinking. It was really devastating for me and my family and all that, just that situation that I was in, and was just a brokenness that it was a tough time. I lost my house. I couldn't make those payments. I got hooked up with these people, and they were able to get me into the temporary type of housing. And so, yeah, it was humbling. So I went to Wayside. There's that part that, spiritually, emotionally, and all that you have to sort out. Why the escape? And that's what treatment did for me. When you're struggling with substance misuse and addiction and that, because you're not present. You're not present. You want to be, but you're not. My family, they are a huge priority in my life, and I feel extremely honored to be able to be present with them.
What I'm most proud of is just to see you on the other side of sobriety, and I know the courage that it takes to get there. I see a lot of families that don't get there, and my own husband, his mother didn't get there. She's a warrior.
I had this thought, what it would be the coolest, the most awesome thing to be able to go back to Wayside and work as a nurse. When I have the honor of meeting a woman who's like fresh, coming into treatment, or still active maybe in the substance use, I talk to that person to find out where they're at, and I just let them know that this is temporary. This is not the rest of your life, and it doesn't have to be. I stay mentally healthy by exercising. It clears my thoughts. It helps me focus on the present and where I'm at, which then helps me be able to feed my body, to do what I need to do each day with clarity. I got involved in the senior games. I said, I'm gonna figure it out. I looked at what the expectations were to be able to compete. So I thought, oh gee, and then I went to the triathlon. In the triathlon, there was no qualifications for time. You just had to finish it in a day, and I said, shoot, I can do that. I had a bike. It was about like $50. I still have that bike. And that was my first formal triathlon. I haven't stopped since then. It has given me a connection spiritually with something much bigger than myself. It evens me out and gives me clarity on life, and also just the desire and the knowing that there isn't anything that can happen to you in this world and in your life that isn't going to be okay. But I'm 100% present now, and that is such a gift. I would tell anyone who is struggling in their life that there is help and there are resources that can work with you, and you're not alone.
So Carol's story always brings tears to my eyes, and I am not a crier, so it tells you the real power that is in that recovery journey. And one thing that I would just like to share, so this documentary has been running in a commercial size short that has played during multiple football games over the last month and a half. And we've received emails from people who saw this commercial during those games, and they've reached out to Wayside to get help. So thank you, Carol, for being brave, thank you for being courageous, and thank you for being willing to be vulnerable in front of us to share your story. It's making a difference. So we're gonna switch gears to what you are all here to see today, the panel discussion. And I would like to invite up Tana Gallup, our Senior Director of Outpatient Services.
Hello, everyone. All right. And with that, I'm going to invite our panelists up. So Monica, Erin, Ruth, if you'd like to join me up here on our stage. Well, welcome and welcome again. We have a fantastic panel today with three amazing women who are going to help us to engage in the discussion about the epidemic of addiction in the nursing field. We're going to be exploring their thoughts and their unique perspectives on this particular issue. We'll be having one question for each of our panelists, a few for the panel as a whole, and then at the end we're going to have time for questions and answers from our panelists from our audience. First off, to get started, I'd like to have you each introduce yourself to everyone. We'll just start with Monica and work our way down.
I'm Monica Fighter. I'm Program Manager for the Health Professional Services Program, which is the state's monitoring program for healthcare professionals who have illnesses that could impact their practice. I've been at HPSB for a very long time, and prior to that, I worked in inpatient psychiatry for a number of years and in community mental health before that. So thank you you all for coming.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ruth. I'm a person in recovery. Also happen to be a nurse. While I was in active addiction, my active addiction brought me to using while I was pregnant with my daughter, infidelity while I was married to my husband, bringing home a lifelong viral STD to my husband, and also diversion on the floor in the hospital where I worked. My diversion affected many, many people, my family, friends, neighbors, patients in the hospital that I worked at. I ended up going to the Board of Nursing, losing my license for a year and 4 months, and I was joined the HPSP program. And the resources for my recovery include AA, HPSP treatment, phase 3 growth group through Fairview Recovery Services, and being a part of a wonderful organization called Nursing Peer Support Network. I continue to do all of these activities that give me life, and my message today is to bring hope to nurses that recovery is possible, and to be a wonderful nurse in recovery is also possible.
Thank you.
And my name is Erin Murphy, and I am a registered nurse. Started practicing back in 1985, so now it feels like a while ago. I'm really happy to see some of my most earliest colleagues in nursing right over there, including Kathy King, who's the Executive Director for the Minnesota Organization of Registered Nurses. It's good to be in the room with my fellow nursing warriors. I currently am the Executive Director of an organization called Our Stories, Our Health, because we believe the power of our stories can shift the narrative in healthcare and remind us that the healthcare system is about us and about our health and our cure and our care. It's not right now anymore. And I'm really happy to be here this morning.
Thank you. Well, Erin, we're going to actually start our first question with you. And so from your time as a nurse and as the executive director of the Nursing Association, what challenges did you see for the profession, and how did those challenges escalate substance use disorders in the field of nursing?
It is a great question. I began practicing nursing at a time when nursing was better resourced than it is today. I was a med-surg nurse, so cared for people on a clinical floor, people with chronic conditions. And we often had too many patients and not enough nurses, but not nearly to the degree that nurses are experiencing today. I have a daughter who's just 3 years into her nursing practice, and she's about ready to throw in the towel right now. I was also a surgical nurse. I worked in the operating room, and there I saw our ability to cope, going from the operating room right to the bar. Nursing is not the only profession that takes you into the hard parts of people's lives. But it is a profession that I continue to express to people, which is not a saintly profession, but instead a gritty profession. And we face both the awesome experiences of people as they muster their way through a real challenge, but also the real hardness of people's lives. And you carry that with you. It's impossible not to carry that with you. And I know as an operating room nurse, when we had a hard day, we would bundle ourselves up in Wisconsin and head right to a little neighborhood bar. And that was a way to escape the end of the day, the end of the shift. And for many of us, it was, a stop on our way home. But that's not true for lots and lots of nurses. And I don't know that the system as it is today or even then was prepared really to deal with the emotional baggage, the emotional burden that we carry with us. And for many nurses, including people very close to me, they found their way into numbing that pain that they are experiencing from the profession with substances. And I think that has just escalated. I do want to say that with my work with the Minnesota Nurses Association, with people like Marie Anthony and with Monica, I feel like organized nursing has worked hard to protect nurses and patients through the course of their substance abuse and into recovery. And it is important that the system not toss people out because they are using, but instead we hold people and help them find their way back into recovery, back into practice, because this is a condition that needs treatment. And I think we've moved in my tenure, and I saw this especially as the executive director of the nurses, to a place where we want to punish and dispose of people who are using before they're able to get into recovery, and that's not right from my perspective. So I'm really happy to be here today to be a part of this conversation.
And I wholeheartedly agree with the concept of not wanting to dispose of people that struggle. Dr. Gabor Mate famously is quoted with saying, it's not why the addiction, that's the wrong question, it's why the pain. And you did such a beautiful job talking about we're dealing with some of the most difficult human experiences. And that's not something that you can leave at 5 o'clock when you leave the office, even if you go to the bar afterwards, right? And so outside of stopping at the bar, is there anything else that you had noticed that in your experience or in other nurses' experiences that you're aware of? Are there any other supports that are available more as a preventative measure that are able to kind of help with holding the heavy stuff that we're holding us in the nursing field?
It's been a little while since I've been in clinical practice, and there may be better examples than mine. When I think about prevention, I don't think about an individual intervention, but a systemic intervention about the very nature of the way that we're practicing nursing right now. But at least when I was new and practicing, there was a culture of sort of tough it out, especially in the operating room. There was an expectation that you would conform to this is just the way it is, and yeah, it's hard, and toughen up about it, which did not facilitate the full expression of what we were experiencing. And there were times when, as a young nurse, when I was seeing people at the end of their life, I can remember a couple of times in particular where I just excused myself from the situation. Not in a professional way, but like, I gotta get the heck out of here because I am really struggling emotionally with what I am seeing and experiencing. I didn't know where to go with that.
Yeah.
I didn't know where to take that, and gratefully, it didn't take me into a path where I found myself in a place where I was abusing. But I think that for all of us who are practicing in healthcare, more attention to how we channel that rough emotion in the moment and in a more systemic way would be a real important addition to the actual practice of nursing and caring for people.
Absolutely. Thank you. Our next question is for Monica, and for you I have a two-part question. So the first part, from your experience in working with nurses through HPSP, what barriers are nurses experiencing in the healing process? And secondly, what are the service barriers that you see for those who work in the healthcare setting?
From what I see, I think the number one barrier to nurses seeking treatment is the stigma associated with addiction. I think nurses can be hard on one another. What Erin said in terms of having people, stay employed or re-employed is really important. But because there are so many biases about addiction, we don't see that happening. And I also, from a personal perspective, for nurses, I think there's the stigma, but then there's also the internal shame that nurses face or feel related to their addiction because they're nurses. They're not supposed to get, diagnosed with an addiction. They're supposed to be, like we said, very strong. And so it's very humbling and hard, but unfortunately for nurses, there's just so much shame associated with the illness, and I think that's because of the stigma.
And so, I can't speak from the nursing field, but as a therapist and as somebody that teaches up-and-coming therapists, I have heard very frequently that when people are struggling, there's a little bit of this kind of back and forth. It may be stigma, it may be shame of I'm the helper, I'm not the one supposed to be getting help. And so is there anything in the time that you have spent with HPSP and in the very important work that you've done with nurses that you've been able to, any particular messages of hope or any other ways that we've been able to help people come to a better place to accept?
Sorry to interrupt. Can you speak up just a little
Sure.
bit? People in the back can't hear.
I think the Nurse Peer Support Network has been an absolute extraordinary resource for nurses, and I can't remember how old it is, 5 years, but that has really helped nurses connect with one another and start to break down that shame. And we get so much positive feedback about nurses going to those meetings and talking to other nurses. So I think the Nurse Peer Support Network, peer support in general, is just critically important.
And we're seeing that trend in the field of substance use disorders and mental health, really looking at the importance of peer support and seeing somebody that's been able to cross over and make that leap to know that there is hope on the other side. So wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Ruth, our last individual question is for you. We all know that one of the major barriers in seeking help for substance use disorders are issues like stigma, shame, and fear of loss of livelihood. How did you navigate the barriers to get to a place of seeking help?
First of all, I didn't navigate. It was not navigation, it was survival mode for me. When you're in active addiction, whether you're a nurse or not, I felt like I was in a very, very dark hole. So when I was caught diverting and lost my job, what I can say propelled me was solid just fear and anger. Like I was, can I say this, pissed off. I was so angry. I was so angry at myself. I was just, and I thought, hell no, I am not losing my license. But I didn't know what to do. So I was on the corner of Jackson and University. And I said to myself, I need to find a nurse in recovery. That was in 2012. And Nursing Peer Support Network was not in existence at the time. just started going to AA meetings and finding nurses in recovery, they were all afraid. And I thought, I don't want to talk to a fearful person. I'm already afraid. And so the navigating part was just, I would just call it survival. I was desperate to get better, and I had no idea how. I went to treatment, and I learned about my disease, and there was two things that I asked my counselor. Am I using because I'm an addict, or is it because of my childhood? I did not know why I was doing what I was doing. All I knew is I had this horrible compulsion and obsession to use. And I began to learn about my disease. Then I started going to seeking out women in recovery, just kept seeking that out. I found a nursing salon group at Marie Manthy's house, and that's what started this journey. That's where I met Diane Noss, and that's where I saw the resurrection of Nursing Peer Support Network, which began in 2014. I've been convening in that capacity ever since. But I guess that's when my navigation became purposeful, is I began to understand that there was hope and healing for a person in recovery. Mind you, I really identified as a nurse, so when I lost my nursing job, my whole world crumbled. And I thought that was so interesting, because later on, I said to myself, I would lose my license to stay sober. And that's my stance today, is I would give everything away to keep my recovery and sobriety. Although I wouldn't do that, I just am saying. The navigation process, a nurse in active addiction may not know what that is. We assume that they should know what that is, but for me that wasn't true. And so having those resources available, HPSB, Nursing Peer Support Network, just people that I can reach out to, other nurses that are in recovery, is really important.
And I really appreciate you sharing that it wasn't just, oh, I'm gonna pick up the phone because I automatically know where to go, but being in that survival mode. And while there's a number of different treatment options available, there are very few that are healthcare specific, and there are some very unique things to the lived experiences of those who do serve in healthcare and nursing specifically. And so we are blessed in Minnesota to have a residential program through Hazelden that has a healthcare specific track. And based on my research, the only program I found that has an outpatient nurses only program is now going to be us starting on Monday. And so to be able to have that, have limited pathways is unfortunate, but hopefully we're paving the way to open the door so that more women can find recovery as you have. So thank you for sharing your story with us. We're going to open now the questions for everyone on our panel. And the first question is, the World Health Organization, as Ruth had mentioned earlier, has deemed 2020 the year of the nurse, and has noted that we're going to need a significant number of new people entering the field in order to meet the emerging needs. To build a healthier workforce in the nursing profession, what are the key strategies that need to be employed to make this happen?
I'll start out. I think one of the things that I see is instead of terminating a nurse, really encouraging the nurse to seek treatment, put them on a family, FMLA so they can seek treatment, and then reintegrate them into work. The other piece to that, I think, is leadership in nursing and more education about addiction among nurses. When I used to work in a hospital, I would often hear people talk about, the drunk in this room, or, that coke head in this room, and there really wasn't the compassion associated with treating addiction that I think is so important. So more education about addiction, I think, is key. And then creating healthy work environments, which, because of resources, is so difficult. But I feel like we're going to lose more nurses if we don't create more healthy work environments. So that's my initial thoughts.
And then a follow-up.
I have been thinking a lot about healthcare in Minnesota and in America in the last year since I've been out of elected office. And I feel like we are bumping up, or not bumping, we're being bumped up against by two incredible forces. One is the sort of pulling out the key pieces of the Affordable Care Act in this current administration that is leaving a system that was in a transition with a lot of breaks in it that have made it less reliable. And in the passage of, in the wake of the Affordable Care Act, along with changes to Medicare in the last decade or so, I've watched us, from where I sit, move from a healthcare system in Minnesota that was really rooted in the spirit of we're going to care for people, way more quickly to a system that has its roots in profitability and the tools of networks and return on investment and business practices that do not reflect the needs of a system that is built around caring for people that are unpredictable. So a diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be through that diagnosis and treated and cured in X number of days, right? Every person who's entering the doors of a hospital, a clinic, or into recovery is going to take that experience in a different way. And we want to put everybody in a tidy box. And when you don't make it through that tidy box, then we're not going to do anything more for you, and you're kind of on your own. And in our work, in our stories, we've been hearing from people who are trying to navigate a system larger than what we're talking about today that is just set up to deny people care. And inside of that container are healthcare professionals that are trying to do their very best caring for people who are really sick. That is the part of the system that needs to change. We can declare it the year of the nurse. I love that. We can institute practices in hospitals that recognize and reward nurses. Too often that, I think, looks like cupcakes and flowers. But we need to listen to the care providers and make sure that we are pushing ourselves to a system that allows providers to provide the kind of care that patients need, so that we can walk away from that experience feeling like we have been able to do the job we need to do. And when we don't do that, I think it drives more of us into behaviors to kind of patch ourselves up here. And we're talking today about substances, alcohol, opioids, etc. But remember that there are others, food, tobacco, and other addictions that I think when we look at healthcare professionals, we are participants in a lot of behavior that is not necessarily good for us physically, but we do it, and I think it's because the system is disregarding our professionalism and the need for us to do the care that we need to do. So when I think about prevention, it's a big system change, and I know that is David and Goliath, but I feel pretty determined to bring my voice to bear on that, because right now we are not in a place where I think people are going to get the kind of care that they need, and professionals, healthcare professionals, are paying a big price for that.
And so what I've heard both Monica and you talk about is that there's a level of maybe a lack of education, of training on what addiction is, and we still have the moral judgments that are being perpetuated, and then a lack of understanding how can we find systemic ways to allow good work to occur, but actually also allow people to regulate in ways where that are not problematic to our health and detrimental to the care. Excellent. Ruth, did you want to weigh in on this one?
I would just wanted to say I'm so grateful for people advocating for nurses that suffer with substance use disorder who do not suffer with substance uses. I'm so grateful to have your advocacy, because I definitely felt let go when I lost my job. And the thing that I want to say is what I think would be helpful are for nurses in recovery to speak out, and that takes courage. And that's all I have to say about this question.
Our stories are very healing and very powerful. Absolutely. There's a lot of conversations around how healthcare settings are not set up for a nurse to succeed. If we're able to support nurses to enter recovery, what supports are needed in order for them to grow in their recovery in the current healthcare setting, the way that it is now?
For me, when I lost my license, I had, and then got it back, I had 4,000 hours of restrictions. And that was tough. But I made it through that, and I decided when I went back into my nursing career that I had to have some things in place. I had really healthy boundaries, which is really great, because when you are in recovery, hopefully you have good boundaries. And so for me, it wasn't so much of me stepping into and allowing the nursing field to dictate how I was going to nurse. I was very careful about how many hours I took on and what I was and was not willing to do, and I've stuck to that. For instance, working overtime, working extra shifts, having bonuses available, all those things that are very tempting for a nurse to take on and just become overwhelmed. I also am very aware that I have a recovery community outside of the nursing field, so I just don't allow the nursing field to dictate how I'm going to nurse. I'm very careful about that.
I think some of the challenges for succeeding for anyone, but especially nurses, they're often required to work 12-hour shifts, or working night shifts is incredibly challenging for anyone, but especially for nurses who have to be really on top of things. And the whole work-life balance, I think nurses are, I don't want to say trained or go into nursing to care for people, but not themselves. And that work-life balance is just incredibly important, and nursing isn't set up to do that now because of the lack of nurses. Nurses are being forced to work double shifts or extra hours, and it's just not healthy for them, but yet their employers demand it. So I think that is key.
We've already talked about the stigma attached to professionals who use. And I have another family member who's a nurse who, back injury, opioids, started diverting. He lost his license eventually. And while he is in recovery, he has not overcome the shame of that experience. And the system, the way that, this was in another state, but the way in which he was identified and exited added to that stigma. He broke the law. He for sure broke the law. He knows he broke the law. He did things that I would never have anticipated him doing. And that is viewed both through the lens of criminal and unacceptable for the profession of nursing. And that unacceptable for the profession of nursing has got to end. And we have to recognize, like, this is a condition, this is a disease, like any other disease that we're treating. And I think most people understand that framework, but the system doesn't treat the individuals like that. And so while, and I love your story, Carol.
Thank you.
A beautiful, powerful story. I don't know that is the every experience. I think there are a lot of people who find their way into recovery but don't find their way back into their full self, or maybe even into practice because of the shame that comes along with the behaviors that are related to the addiction.
It's a very important part of the recovery journey that, Carol, you highlighted in the video of talking about an important part of that, and that's one of the unique parts of Wayside's treatment, is we really talk about how do we overcome the shame, how do we address the guilt, how do we address a relationship within ourselves, and then address our greater circle of relationships to really facilitate healing at every level. So thank you for highlighting the importance of
I
Mm-hmm.
had
that.
a couple things. I
Please.
think sometimes we forget, or we don't acknowledge that nursing, there are inherent risk factors in nursing.
Yes.
Administering medications is a risk factor. When we look at the people that are in our program, you can see that pharmacists divert at the highest rate, and that's because they have the most access to drugs. The next highest rate is nurses, and I think those risk factors should be acknowledged and taken into account. Like you, I appreciate that someone may be breaking the law, but there, that risk factor has to be, I think, taken into account. And instead of, further shaming someone by taking them out of work by the police, to, deal with that in a much more compassionate way. And I want to say, a lot of the nurses that I work with are often described as top performers. They'll work extra shifts or doubles. It's my best employee. And yet, when there's an issue, I think the employer feels betrayed instead of, again, looking at it as an illness. So I think, more education is just critical. And then the other piece I wanted to mention is second chances. When you were reemployed, I think we see nurses who are under disciplinary orders that find it really challenging to find employment. And if there are more employers willing to give nurses a second chance and be supportive of them in their recovery throughout that process, I think it would make a world of difference.
I will say the place that I was let go from or fired from, I did go back to the vice president and asked if I could be reemployed. I wasn't afraid, and I think that I was at first. So the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. And I think when we're talking about the fear or the stigma of not being able to be reemployed, it's a small area, and that usually means I'm talking about it. I now put a voice to it. And that to me is the big difference between staying in the darkness and coming out into the light, is just saying, I'm proud to be a person in recovery. I'm proud that I'm a nurse in recovery. But when I was fired, my boss handed me 2 sticky notes. One had the Board of Nursing's number on it, and the other one had HPSV. I didn't know what either one of them were, so I called the Board of Nursing. Wrong. So I'm sitting there self-reporting to the Board of Nursing, and she said, you need to stop talking and call HPSV. But it's, I think back as someone who is really closeted in recovery, and I wish I could remember seeing something from HPSV or the Board of Nursing or something having to do with recovery. Would it have made a difference? I don't know, because I was not coming out. But I know a lot of nurses that have self-reported before they were caught diverting like I was. So I think having those pieces available, either in LMS, learning venues or nursing fairs or something like that, I think that would be very helpful.
So we know the level of needs that are present and the current challenges that nurses face. From each of your opinions, what would prevention look like?
I think prevention, again, I go back to education, mandatory CMEs or something related to addiction and mental health. Also creating wellness within work settings, or because there are so many work settings for nurses that are so small, is there a way to develop wellness specifically for nurses outside of the work setting? And one of the things that you mentioned earlier is that, when being able to talk about your recovery, I think if there were more leaders in nursing that were willing to, I want to say, out themselves in terms of their recovery, it would lend other people, I think they would be less afraid, and it offers them the opportunity to talk to someone who's in recovery when they are fearful. I think of Jim Alexander, who runs the Pharmacist Recovery Network, and he said when he was in recovery, he was known as the pharmacist in recovery. And other pharmacists would call him, or the supervisors, excuse me, of other pharmacists would call him. So he was the point person because he was the only pharmacist known to be in recovery. And I think Jim's okay with me mentioning that. He's shaking his head yes. But because there is someone who's respectable, when you have a leader in nursing who's respected, who is willing to acknowledge their recovery, it makes a huge difference. And I also think that with mental health, not just addiction. Mental health is, there's continue to be huge amount of stigma regarded to people being treated for mental health disorders.
I mentioned earlier that I have a daughter who is a nurse, not currently practicing right now, not living in Minnesota right now. 3 years into her, maybe 4 years into her practice. And, you know, there is in listening to her talk about her preparation as a nurse, we still are preparing nurses, you know, to be excellent caregivers, but caregivers, and not thinking about ourselves necessarily inside that ecosystem, and the risk to ourselves in entering in. And so I do think more in the early education of nurses, in the preparation of what we are going to experience as nurses, because she is like so many young nurses who step in, begin to practice, and step out because it is completely overwhelming. In a way that I think has made her really rattled about her commitment to the profession, because she's seen and experienced things that she didn't expect to see and didn't know how quite to deal with them. And it's, you know, she's found her way into some therapy, et cetera, which has been helpful. But that early preparation for what we're going to experience and that orientation, I think, would help the profession. People like Marie Manthe and others who tell their story. And when I listen to Marie talk about her experience now, she tells it with such candor and ownership and pride. Like, this is what I experienced, this is what happened to me, this is the price I paid, this is what we need to do about that. I think she is shining a really bright light, as she always has, as a vanguard on the leadership of the profession in the direction that we need to go. And then, as I've mentioned before, the systemic changes that we need to make in the practice of nursing, the delivery of healthcare, need to happen for the people in our care, for the caregivers. And until we do that, I think we're going to continue to wrestle with this. We'll make headway if we deal with the stigma, if we get people better oriented to what they're heading into, if we are continuing to build the systems that support people who are experiencing addiction so they can get back to practice. But the environment itself is part of the problem that we need to tackle.
And I just want to add on to the environment, because nurses often face a high degree of violence within their work setting. Not only are they dealing with, you know, feelings when patients are ill and family members are angry or sad, you know, we see so much more violence in our society in general, but nurses are facing it, I think, on a regular basis. And the other thing I see, particularly in some of the nurses that I've worked with, is that they've got have workplace injuries, which resulted in being prescribed controlled substance or narcotics, and then becoming addicted to those. So I think looking at really the practice of nursing and how, again, it's delivered, are there ways to limit or minimize the violence in work settings, as well as the risk of physical harm to nurses?
My poor brain. It went from what you said to what you said. I forgot what I wanted to say. Okay. But anyway, you know, I think there's a woman in this room, Carrie Capel, who is my mentor and friend. I just zeroed in on her. She was not afraid to say, can I say it?
Sure.
That I am a nurse in recovery, and when I came out, I could identify the fear. The fear was controlling my life, which is the stigma and shame and all that stuff. I wanted nothing to do with that. And then I would hear voices like saying, Ruth, be careful. You know, you're a nurse in recovery. Do you really want to say that? And then I was scared for a different reason. And I'm like, yeah. The fear, anytime I feel that feeling, I just ask God, what should I do? And every time it says, I don't need to be afraid of who I am. And so this question to me is twofold. Are you a nurse that wants recovery? I think that's really important to ask the question, because you may not be a nurse that wants recovery and you just got caught, which is a question I ask myself throughout. what is my motive for recovery? The second one is prevention would have a trickle-down effect for management and HR and, you know, all of those things. So it's a work in progress. Anyway.
Can I just say
Yes.
something here? I can't hardly keep my mouth shut when I pass this stuff.
My
But,
sister
you
came
know,
out and
you know,
recorded.
but I wanna add to all of this, just briefly, that one of the reasons that I did this for Blue Cross and Blue Shield, this segment, I really troubled what you were talking about. I really, really troubled over this. I had some fear. One of my biggest barriers is maybe something that we haven't covered as much as my family and the effects of putting my stuff on the Jumbotron at the Vikings game, that I had gone to prison and that I was a nurse and all those things. And so that was a huge, I never, when they approached me to do this, you know, I said, you really want to hear my story? You know, and I hesitated and I said, you know, I'm not going to tell you all of it. You know, and so I think that that's a big piece of it, is how we're looked at with our, you know, not everyone's going to accept what we've done as being okay, right? They're not gonna, but I came to that, what I came to was like, if one person can be inspired and help and have hope between me putting myself out there, so that's worth it, you know. But that's the what you were talking about, that's that battle. So yeah.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I want to turn it now back over to our CEO, Ruth, to wrap up just a few minutes of question and answers. And
Sure. So if you have questions for the panel, feel free to jump in.
I have a question. Could you describe what Wayside's program is going to be and how you're going to reach out? You know, what's the program and how will you reach out besides this wonderful forum today?
so I, along with other individuals from Wayside, are going to be connecting with a number of different nursing agencies, clinics, hospitals, really talking to pretty much anybody that's going to listen, and talking about the co-occurring program that we're offering. It's going to be an evening program, Monday through Thursday, starts from 5:30, goes until 8:30, is going to be actually led in part by the fabulous Carol Bell, is going to be joining us for 2 evenings a week. The other parts of that, so we're going to be working on process groups, really talking about the triggers and the shame and the stigma and the difficulties associated with pretty much everything our fantastic panel talked about today. We will be also working on some different curriculums and engaging those that talk about shame, again, the relationship with ourselves, healing our grief and loss and the difficulties that we faced, healing our relationships, being able to understand boundaries and put them into action, because it's one of the most important things, and being able to support women long term. We also have ongoing mental health services that people can stay with, not just while they're in our outpatient program, but for years to come, because we know that that continuum of care is vital and ongoing support is needed, particularly in early recovery.
So I'd like to know, define for me, there's a registered nurse and LPNs. Are LPNs able to come to this?
RNs, LPNs, CNAs, if you're a woman and you associate with the nursing profession, we welcome you into our program.
So when I was working at Abbott, I'm in recovery as well. I went to my boss. I was very transparent about, you know, my addiction and everything, and she was very supportive. And I remember her telling me, she's like, you're not alone. There are people on our unit who are dealing with that. But of course, she couldn't tell me who those people were. But through, I discovered some of them just from, you know, my own honesty. But do you think it would be beneficial, or is there some way where we could have like a, you know how they have the liaisons or a nurse who takes care of like falls, or, you know, on the unit to have like a recovery advocate, somebody who if you wanna connect with other nurses, even in the hospital, that you could have this person who's, bound by confidentiality you could go to, and then those nurses could come together and meet and be supportive for each other in the work environment. Because once I found some people in the work environment, on my unit, it was like, oh my gosh, I am having a hard day, and just having that person who understands what you're going through, is that something that could be done?
I think the closest thing that you're gonna get to that right now is Nursing Peer Support Network. I mean, there are many locations in the Twin City area here in St. Paul, Edina, Woodbury, Oakdale. I think it's a good idea, but I think that's the closest thing that you're gonna get currently, and you'll find someone instantly who identifies and has been through the logistical process of varying degrees. I've been in recovery for over 7.5 years. I've been through the whole entire gamut. And I know, and we know who each other's are, and we'd be able to give you contacts with that information. And then I think, again, having a voice and asking for help out loud if you're willing to do that would be another way. But I think it's a good idea, but I think currently that's the closest thing you're gonna get is Nursing Peer Support Network. Yeah. And it's online, by the way, we have that information for you.
Yeah.
So I have one more question. I'm gonna be transparent. I'm looking for my daughter who's an LPN. And not only, she was doing exactly what you were talking about, trying to get the bonus, working overtime, raising 3 children. She quit and let her license lapse and had a nervous breakdown. So I'm looking at the mental health. Just yesterday, I said, we've got to get you help. I want to know about the mental health piece. She's not been diagnosed. I've been through this with her for 5 years. If I get her to come to the sessions, I know who said, that's what it's been. It's been very difficult for my family. If she comes to the sessions, what is the mental health piece? Will they diagnose her? Will she, that's all based here also.
We have a full gamut of services, and so while I can't guarantee anyone in particular is going to absolutely receive a diagnosis, we do have a diagnostic assessment. The programming itself is co-occurring, meaning that we don't say addictions over here and mental health here. There's a lot of overlap and connection between these two. So the curriculum that we've devised and the curriculum that we employ really addresses both in tandem, and we speak to how these issues really kind of continue to impact one another. And so, again, we have that co-occurring group facilitation that will be happening, but then we also have that ability to have our clients meet with their person that they get connected with for mental health in treatment long-term. So that is one of the really unique and very important things that Wayside does.
And I hate to be the wet blanket, but I'm the timekeeper, and we are at time at 9 o'clock, but please continue to stay and communicate with one another, get in touch with Tam. Thank you to our panelists for giving up themselves this morning. Erin, Ruth, I don't often meet Ruths. To get the word out related to this program. Thank you all again for coming this morning, and have safe travels.
Thank you.